Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Chatting with the Lightkeeper. I'm Edward, if you already didn't know that. Anyway, today the subject that's in my mind is accountability in a lifestyle relationship. Now, however, before we really get going on accountability, I just have to say that my mind today is kind of like one of those bounce houses. It's bouncing all over the place. So please bear with me. I hope I can keep my mind on track from chasing down too many shiny squirrel things over there and deal with the topic at hand. But just in case I can't, or you find yourself wondering what the heck I'm talking about, understand that my mind is a little bouncy today. It's kind of a rare thing for me, but it's also kind of fun to be in this mood. That's why I thought I would tackle a podcast while my mind was a little a little squirrel like. Or is it a dog that's chasing the squirrel? However that works. Anyway, let's chat a little bit about accountability, shall we? Now, accountability sort of takes many forms in a lifestyle relationship. It can be from the crafting of the rules or guidelines, and then something that seems like many dominants like to talk about in their blog posts and online, and that's punishments or corrections. And before we dive any further, I tend to view things a little differently. So if your way of doing things is different than mine, understand that's perfectly okay because I'm a little unique when it comes to this. First of all, I don't believe in rules. Now, there does need to be structure in my mind. That's an important need is structure. So rather than have rules, I prefer to call them guidelines. Now, perhaps you can just say it's tomato, tomato, but for me, it's a little different because for me, a rule is it's black and white. It's either yes, you followed the rule, no, you didn't follow the rule. Unfortunately, life is, to use the pun, is many shades of gray. So I guess we could say that there's more than 50 shades of gray when it comes to life. And guidelines allow for flexibility. For example, let's say one of the rules the submissive has is no physical talking on your cell phone and driving, like holding the phone and talking on the phone, which is illegal in many places now. But let's say for some reason that it is not where you are, or it's a challenge you're trying to work on with your submissive. But because life is the way it is, let's say they're driving and they receive an urgent phone call that they have to take. Now, that's where the rule folks would feel that, well, they broke the rule because they took the call. And I would say no, because life throws us some curves and sometimes we have to just handle things in life. And something like that shouldn't be something that demands punishment. Or in my world, correction, because to me, punishment brings to mind scenes of jail, prison, really, really bad things. Like punishment it's not a positive word. And for me, as a dominant, correcting an issue, correcting something that has gone wrong or a mistake that's been made, it's just sort of like in a way like a teacher. You've made a mistake on a math problem and they correct it so you learn from it and you go forward, which is what, in my opinion, should happen. It shouldn't be a you were naughty and I'm going to put you in kinky jail and punish you. It should be okay. We're going to acknowledge that there's been a mistake made and we're going to correct the mistake and move forward. And once it's done and we move forward and, lesson learned, move ahead in life. So that's how I see things. So when I say guidelines rather than rules and I say correction rather than punishment, understand what they mean and the why behind it. And the accountability side of DS is very important because many people who practice the lifestyle, beyond just the kinky sexual side of it, and there's nothing wrong at all if that's your jam. But for many people who want more from the lifestyle or engage more heavily in the lifestyle, perhaps, um, having the structure, the accountability side of it is a very important piece of their relationship. Now, does that mean you have to have that in your relationship? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It's one of the beautiful things about the lifestyle. It's very individualistic. You can practice it how it works for you. So the accountability side is typically made up of guidelines, and I also believe that dom and sub are equal partners in the relationship, and there are dominants who will disagree with this as well as submissives. But I believe that when you're crafting the guidelines that are going to be in place in that relationship, that it's a joint project. It's a together project. Just like everything else, the submissive has to consent to them, give their input to them. Perhaps the submissive would like something that the dominant doesn't take into account, so they may ask for something in addition. And guidelines also should be, made specifically for that relationship. I always find it troubling when I find somebody online who is dominant and they've posted their rules for their next relationship. My next semester will follow these rules. Well, what if they don't need them? Or they don't like some of them. So it's to me, it's always something that gets created together. It's a joint project, and the submissive is consenting to agree that that they will live within these within these boundaries that are established. I think it's very important that it's a we project rather than just a a dominant sort of playing God handing the Ten Commandments to Moses type of thing. I believe that it's a together project, and then once they're created, it's very important that that the dominant, uphold them. And I think the biggest problem with accountability actually comes when we get into, if you will, the enforcement side. So that's where I think we will spend most of the time here talking about. In fact, I know that's where we're going to spend most of the time on this podcast chatting about is the upholding the enforcement or the actual implementing the accountability in a dynamic. So it's very important that trust be there because the submissive needs to trust that their dominant is going to um, abide by the rules, respect their limits, respect everything that they've discussed from their limits to just respecting them as a person during this whole process. And the dominant, of course, has to respect all of that. And it can be one of the bigger challenges is the continuous accountability that needs to be there. And I'll get to that a little bit later. Why that's actually becomes a challenge in some cases for dominance. It's something that I have struggled with. So there are some challenges. First of all, like I said, DS to me is a partnership, where it's, the submissive and the dominant are partners, and it is on the dominant to be responsible, to be ethical, and all of that with the guidance and the enforcement. Submissives, of course, have to express their boundaries, and just because, let's say, a submissive has, violated a guideline, there's still the consent piece still needs to be there for the enforcement, the upholding, the correction. The submissive still has to consent to that. It's not they don't lose their ability to um, withhold consent in that process. And there are some dominants, and these individuals do give me the heebie-jeebies that believe when a submissive breaks one of their rules, at that point, safe words are out the window. The submissive really has withdrawn or has consented to whatever the punishment that the dominant wishes to give, and I completely disagree. Many people feel that way as well as me. It's not just this, definitely not a me thing. And in fact, I would say that that's a red flag because that's a very easy way um, for a dominant to use their power unethically um, in it. So The other thing that I talked about briefly was that the consistency that a dominant upholds, when something goes against the guidelines. It can be very easy, especially if you are in an amazing relationship with an amazing submissive, just speaking for myself. The submissive says, "Hey, today I did this," sort of self-reporting their violation. And of course, the submissive is upset. And honestly, it's harder, I believe, for the submissive to come forward and sort of self-report their violation than any correction as a dominant that I could give them. So if you see a submissive who is generally regretful, you can see that they are upset and unhappy with themselves for what has happened. It can be very easy to want to just give them a hug and say, "We'll do better next time." However, then you get into, well, am I going to enforce the guideline today? Am I not going to enforce the guideline? And it slowly eats away at the DS component, if you will, of the relationship. So that consistency is incredibly, incredibly important. That even if the submissive knows they've done wrong, is regretful, you talk about what happened, and you still need to follow through with a correction for the relationship to be consistent every time that there's something. You are consistently there as a dominant. It's part of what makes things go. And speaking of talking things through, communication is key. It is so important that when something goes bump, that a dominant just doesn't say, "Okay, over my knee, I'm going to give you 10 spankings for this." It's very important to talk through what happened, find out why it happened, um, and then as a dominant, I believe the dominant should look at the guidance they've given their submissive, examine it, find out if was it the guidance that I gave was unclear, was it misunderstood? Look at themselves, to verify that everything, that was uh, understandable. They understood. It wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't something that the dominant needs to address as well. So it's very important to have a communication about that, as well as what the correction is going to be. Whether it's going to be, for example, write an essay for me on why you talked on your phone, or write an essay about the dangers of using your cell phone while driving, going back to that. So it's very important that you talk through what happened, why it happened, what needs to be done to make it not happen again in the future, and then also to talk about, this is how we're going to correct it. And the submissive is consenting to all of this. It's not kind of as the movies make it out to be, where the dominant instantly kind of goes into, you typically see in media, it's, typically, "Okay, you're over my knee, it's spanking time." So it's very important that the submissive is consenting um, to the whole process, including the correction. Now, another challenge that happens with the accountability side is it can be very emotional. It can be emotional for the submissive to share what happened, and sometimes maybe what the submissive did is upsetting for the dominant, or the submissive is upset, or they're both upset, or everyone is upset. However it works, emotions can be on edge. There can potentially be anger, regret, sorrow, all sorts of all over the place emotions. So it's very important to balance the emotions that are happening. And dominants should never correct or punish if they are upset or angry. It's perfectly okay for a dominant to say, I'm, still a little upset about this, and we'll talk it through, but we're going to have a bit of a cool down period, and then we'll get to the correction. Once we've once everyone's calmed down. And it's also very important sometimes too, as a dominant, your submissive could be very upset. So it may be that you need to soothe, calm, reassure the submissive and bring the emotion level down before moving forward with even a discussion of what happened. So it's very important that there's an emotional balance involved with it, rather than a rush to discuss, correct, and move forward. Sometimes it takes a little while to happen. And then there are other times when um, things need to happen right there in the moment. A good example of this, speaking for myself, is many, many years ago, I was dating a submissive, and she had three older sisters, and it was her mom's, it was a big milestone birthday. I don't remember what it was. I just know it was a big milestone birthday for her mom. So I agreed to help set up for the birthday party, which meant I was sort of the heavy lifter. I was the one setting up tables and chairs while the sisters did the decorations. And one of the things about this, the dynamic between the sisters, is the older sister liked to get under the skin of the youngest, the missive I was dating. And then there would be the middle sister who would kind of play fire starter and try and get the older submissive riled up or get her younger sister fired up. And so the when the three of them were together for family events, there was always somehow some sort of drama between them. That's just how their family dynamic worked. So I made it a point to talk with my submissive beforehand, and we talked about this numerous times about the importance of this is her mom's day and how if, middle sister or, older sister tried to start getting her riled up to just let it go, not respond, put it away. It's her mom's day. Focus on that. Don't let her mom's milestone birthday be impacted by sisterhood rivalries or sister rivalries or whatever you want to call it. So it was something that we had and talked about. And so the day of the event, I'm just finishing setting up tables, and the other job I had beside that, I was the one that was going to go get the balloons. So I had to do a balloon run once I had everything set up. When I realized that my submissive was actually trying to provoke both of her older sisters into an argument, literally trying to, just it was plain as day. And so I pulled her aside and said, remember, play nice, not any sort of public shaming or anything. It was very, very off to the side. No one noticed. No one could tell what was said. And as soon as that was over, she was back at poking at her sisters. So I needed to get the balloons, and I kind of said to the other two sisters, "Hey, do you mind if I take her with me? I don't want to accidentally lose a balloon in the process because there was tons of balloons, and plus having them bounce all around my car was going to be an adventure. So I did welcome the extra hands and took her with me. And as soon as we started on the drive, she was dead silent. And I said, "Why were you, stirring up trouble with your sisters?" And she kind of was defensive and said she wasn't and was borderline, if you would, in the DS term, kind of bratty. And I thought, boy, I need to stop this before it starts, or this whole birthday party is going to devolve into a heated exchange between the sisters in front of family, friends, and her mother. And oh God, this is just going to be a nightmare. So on the way to get the balloons, we passed a school and I pulled into the parking lot, went around back. It was, obviously after school hours. In fact, it was summertime, so there were no kids at the school. And lo and behold, behind the school, of course, were the athletic fields. And then there was a section of woods. And since it was summer, the trees were all leaved out and it was kind of woodsy. So I got out of the car, took her by the hand. Um, it really didn't say much. We went into the woods, and I had her kind of bend over, put her hands up against a tree, and I said, "Do you know why I'm going to spank you?" And she just immediately started crying and said, "Yes, yeah, I am ruining my mom's birthday and I'm poking, at my sister's and I'm so sorry and da da da. And I gave her just like 5 spankings and it wasn't powerful. They were just light, more designed to cause the sound than any actual physical discomfort. But it turned out that that release for her was what she needed, because after that process was over, after the tears stopped, um, we were, we were good. Made sure we communicated, we talked. He knew I was good with it. She was relieved. All of it was like out of her system. She helped me get the balloons, and after that was, the rest of the party went flawlessly. There was no family drama. This probably for the first time in years in that family, and it was amazing. And I am not a physical person when it comes to corrections, meaning I'm not a over my knee, I'm going to spank you. It's more of write me an essay or write me lines or something along the lines where it's a mental thing rather than a physical one. But in that time, I knew I needed to do something, because we obviously had an issue that had to be resolved, and that was the only thing that came to mind. And so the lesson I took away from that was there's a time and a place for something like that, and there's times and places for various other kinds of corrections when needed. So it's very important for a dominant to not fall into a trap of every time gets this response. And it's also very important to understand things that your submissive likes. So if they are, say, a big fan of spanking, and I am for if you're submissive, being spanked as a correction versus being spanked for punishment, that's fun-ish-ment, not punishment, punishment, like you're role-playing a scene and it's spanking for fun, punishment. I'm sure there's a difference between receiving a spanking for a correction and receiving one for fun. But it just seems like so often the spanking is the go-to correction. You see it online all the time. And if that's something that a submissive really enjoys, perhaps look at something else because maybe they are finding some joy in it, which would be a little, defeating the purpose a bit. So I think it's very important to kind of take that into consideration as well. Um, Now there are some pitfalls to be aware of when it comes to accountability. Sometimes newer dominants will um, it can be easy when they are not, I shouldn't say easy, but I have seen it happen where a newer dominant will um, overstep or come right up to boundaries, right on the borderline of where they shouldn't be, especially in a correction, because they are allowing their emotions to rule the roost rather than being calm and collected about it. So it's something that is very important that not only dominants are aware of, but submissives be aware of it too, especially if it's um, early on in your partnership, and to see how, I'm not saying, break a guideline to see how your dominant reacts, but when it happens, be mindful of how they react to if an overstepping of one of the guidelines. Do they, challenge a boundary? Do they come right up into it? And as always, safe words and gestures have to be respected. Anytime you run into a dominant that doesn't, run away. Um, Another pitfall of accountability um, is the dominant also has to acknowledge when they make a mistake, um, and they have to take responsibility for it. Um, there was, I can't remember what the infraction was that the same submissive we were working on correcting a bad habit, and I just remember it was a bad habit, and they had recently done it, self-reported it, and they wrote some lines, good old-fashioned handwritten lines on notebook paper. And then I did it, and I wasn't even thinking I did it. And then after the fact, I realized what I had done. So it was at work that I did whatever it was, and I'd always check in on during my lunchtime, how's the day going, whatnot. So before I checked in, I wrote lines. And so I sent a text, how are you doing? Guess what I did this morning? And here's the picture. So it's very important that a dominant also holds themselves to the same standards, same guidelines that they expect from their submissive. It's not what's not okay for you is okay for me. There's none of that. If you say the submissive, can't do X, the dominant can't do X. Another thing that you see sometimes, especially in newer partnerships, from newer submissives thinking this is okay to newer dominants not knowing that this should be done. But aftercare needs to be part of any be part of a correction. There has to be that we're good, everything's good, it's water under the bridge, we're moving forward, and emotionally, and perhaps depending on what the correction was, physical aftercare provided, just to make sure everything is good and to kind of bring everything back around so that everyone is looking to the future rather than looking back. And it's especially reassuring for the submissive that everything is indeed good. That now that the problem is corrected, they and the relationship are moving forward. So it's very important to do that. Also, it's important to make sure that the correction or the punishment fits the crime. Sometimes you see where it's like, wow, that was really extreme for that minor little misstep, So it's very important that both dominant and submissive make sure that whatever the correction or punishment is fitting the mistake. And like I said, there's 50 shades of ways to make mistakes, and it's it's a-okay to sort of rule something more severe than something else, and have that be a part of the process. It's also fine to talk about if there's a next time, what might be an appropriate response. However, obviously, that's something not to you don't want to necessarily dwell on because hopefully it'll be a positive and there won't be a next time. Sometimes if you're working to break a long-standing habit, next times happen because habits are a challenge to break. But I really think that it's important to make sure that everything fits, that it's not too extreme here, too light there, but just a little bit of uncommon sense, if you will. Um, it's also very important that submissives not be quiet, be meek uh, when it comes to sharing how they feel during conversations about accountability. It's very important that a submissive is um, very well versed or willing to advocate for what their boundaries are, what they will consent to, what they won't consent to, and once again, verifying that if they say their safe word during the process or they say no, that is going to be respected. It's a mandatory thing, and it's very important that submissives use their voice and don't feel that okay, I just made a mistake, so somehow that takes away my voice because it doesn't. So it's very important in those times to make sure that you use your voice, speak clearly, communicate clearly, um, because it's a time when communication is very, very very important. Um, so make sure that anytime you are having to discuss a correction, that you are having effective or even discussing crafting the guidelines that could lead to the correction down the road. That there's great communication between dominant and submissive, that there's active listenings on all sides, and that there's no misunderstandings, or if there's a question, it is asked. Because this is an area where assumptions are not fun because assumptions really cause issues. Another thing that needs to happen is that there needs to be um, on both sides of the slash some self-reflection and self-improvement, meaning that as you grow along and as you grow in your partnership, that the dominant learns what they can do better on the accountability side, and the submissive learns um, how they can do better and how that the guidelines or the corrections can be improved, and this gets discussed. So it's an ever evolving it's an ever evolving process. That's one that just doesn't stay the same. It's continuously changing. In fact, have a conversation. Obviously, not right at the time is not necessarily ideal, but have a conversation. Whether you're a dominant or submissive, have a conversation um, maybe a few days or a week or so after something has gone bump as far as guidelines and corrections go, and talk about it. What worked for you? What was impactful for you? What didn't work for you? And that way, when or if there's a next time, it can be better. Because it's a once again it's a partnership. It is not just the dominant says and the submissive has to submit and do. It is still a partnership, even in these times, which our media and even posts you see online often make it out to be very much the dominant inflicting the judgment and the submissive willingly accepting whatever it is that the dominant has decided. And that just, for me, is a no-go. It needs to be a partnership, a team, even during these kind of trying times. And if you're not sure where to go or you're not sure on ideas for that part of your relationship, it's a great time to seek out guidance and support from your DS community. It's especially great if you have connections in person where you can talk to, for example, a couple that has been together in the lifestyle for 20 years and see how they do things and how they've evolved. So much knowledge can get learned from looking at what works for other people. It doesn't mean it has to work for you. In fact, it could be, oh, that works for them. Wow, that just doesn't work for me at all. So it's very the community, especially the in-person community where you can make those connections, can be a great resource, even for what to do or even what not to do. And finally, it's so important for dominance to make sure that when the process has played out, when there's been the guidelines created and something has gone bump and there's been a misstep on the part of the submissive, that when the correction portion is all done, that kind of as part of the aftercare, that the submissive is reassured that this issue, this mistake that has happened, is now water under the bridge and it's done, and together you're going to keep going forward. So often, one of my personal pet peeves is you see dominants who will kind of be passive aggressive with the whole thing, if you will. You'll hear something like, "Oh, remember 2 weeks ago when you did?" It's like, no, no, that was 2 weeks ago. It's corrected. That's in the past. You're moving forward. There should never, ever be any of that. It should just be this issue is resolved. You're amazing. Together, we're amazing, and we're going forward. So it's very important that that water under the bridge is made clear because it really does, especially to a new partnership. It really helps reassure the submissive as well as the dominant that the relationship is going to keep moving forward, and this misstep or this error is not something that's going to hold back the growth of the relationship. And in fact, because you've talked about it, um, everyone's on the same page as to what happened, why, how it can be prevented next time, what we can do better. And you've talked that it's water under the bridge, and then you talked again as to how later how the correction process is going to be better, smoother, and all that jazz. If there is a next time for something, it is actually a process that will strengthen a PS relationship. So I hope this helps a little bit kind of, especially if you're newer, kind of break through the myths that are out there with the whole accountability and correction side of the lifestyle, because it is so often, when it is represented in media, is so often misrepresentative. And so much of, you see posts and memes and things online that really don't live up to how it works in the real world. So I hope this little podcast today has helped everyone better understand what that process is like. And remember, this is just my thoughts. Other people do practice much differently than I do. And that is absolutely fantastic, because everyone needs to do what fits them and their needs. It's the beautiful thing about DS. So also remember that. But on that note, I do have an enormous favor of everyone who is listening. No matter the platform you're listening on, if you would scroll over and just tap the follow button, so that way you never miss an episode when the new episodes come out every Tuesday. So I would appreciate it if you did that. And I look forward to hearing your feedback on how guidelines and corrections work for you and what doesn't work for you. So I look forward to hearing that, and I want to wish everyone a fantastic week, and I look forward to talking to you next week.